Okay, we're good to go. So it's Tov Reish Chav Tes Sivav b'machtzela shal kanim b'kash v'shifa v'gemi. So these are the different grasses that it's made out of, harder or softer. Benji chalaka, whether it's smooth, which means she'eruya l'shchiva, you'd be able to sleep on it. Ben she'ena chalaka, or if it's rough, she'ena ruya l'shchiva. So let's just see before we turn over. Let me just look at the Yudalit and the Mishabura. She'ena ruya l'shchiva, ein halashon meduktet. The lashon of the Shulchan Aruch is not meduktet. The eina ruya klal amaya mrinun to stam l'shchiva. So I guess when we turn over the page, we're going to see that the Shulchan Aruch paskins that it's stama ruin l'shchiva, and you can't use it for schach, but it can't be that way if it's really not ruin l'shchiva. Ela writes a leimer is up to Mishnah Berurah. She'ena ruya kol kach. It's not super comfortable, but it is usable. The chenu b'tur, and that's in fact how the Torah expresses this halacha. So bench not imhi katana. If it's a small mat, stama oimedes l'shchiva. You say that by default it was made to sleep on, mekabelas tuma, and it's mekabel tuma, they misachachem ba, and you cannot use it for schach, ella im kein asal l'sipach, unless it was made specifically for schach. So if you remember, we have different shittas in the Rishonim what it means making it. Does it mean the manufacturer? Does it mean the buyer, the purchaser? So the Mishnah Berurah takes a stand over here. So the Mishnah Berurah says, emi katana, hainu kadei shchiva. So that really answers your question. The question is, it doesn't give it to us in inches. So here, if you go down to the Sharatin, Chav Daled, if I can get it to focus, Chav Daled, Kedei Shchiva, the Ran says, V'hainu shehi kikoimas ish uma'at yoser. So I would say, if it's the size of a sleeping bag, the question is, I'm not sure how it works nowadays, because there's something called a twin mattress, like we discussed yesterday, and then there's a king size, and people sleep in much wider beds today. So I'm not sure if that impacts it. I was hoping that there would be a number here, and that Dirshu would address it, but I see that they don't. So basically, the way the Sharitzian says is, if it's the size of a sleeping bag or a little bit bigger, that would be considered shtama l'shchiva. Okay, let's see what it means.
That's considered that's considered a small. That's considered a small mat.
That's right, because we're comparing it to like a tarp that would cover over the whole roof.
Okay.
So let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says over here. Stama emes l'shchiva u'mekabel stama perish. The kivon the stama l'shchiva, since it's typically used to lie on. Hiruya l'kabel tuma l'cheshayishka v'haza. If a zav lies on it, it will become tamei. The chivin shekain, and once it can be mekabel tumas mishkav or moishav, af mayata ein ruya l'sikuch. It's no longer royu to be used for schach. So you call it royu l'kabel tuma ein misach. And in the mekabel tuma, you cannot use for schach. Let's see letter number 8 in the Dirshu. Let's see if he addresses anything that's relevant to us. Oh, so it's machzelas shenasisa l'shem schchiva. You have a sleeping mat. Achle nigmar malachta. They didn't finish putting the binding on it and sewing up the loose threads, but its original design and its intent is to use for sleeping. Cause of b'shal l'shuvas mechas Yitzchak was more of a contemporary. Shem yigmaru es malachta l'shem sikuch. If would they finish off the mat, just the last portion, they say this is l'shem schach. Nechshav adover k'shinu ma'isa mutal l'sachachba. So from the Minchas Yichzah, you see, clearly sees that it's the manufacturer who determines the purpose of this mat. So as long as before the final stages, we will call it the makeh b'patish, is done on this mat, as long as at that point you already intended to use it for schach, it would be allowed. What about a mat that's made to stand on? Like people would have mats in front of their bed or in the entranceway. Cause of b'sefer mekroi kodesh, shalachayra mikabelas tumas medrus. It would be mikabel tumas medrus. Upsula sikuch, and once again it'll be possible sikuch because it's a mat that's made to walk on. Okay, and then he says, "Vach machzel she'ena ruya l'shchiva." Even a mat that you cannot sleep on it. Elarak lichrech baschayra. You can only use it to wrap something in. Even if it's just used to wrap something in, That's called a clay kibul umakabelas tuma lefichach psula l'sikach. Okay, so let's see what Mishnah Berurah says weiter. The weiter in Mishnah Berurah, I believe, is already in the Ramah. So the Ramah says, what does it mean? Also the same sikach. So the Ramah seems to depart from what the Mechaber said. The Mechaber, at least the way it's understood in the Mishnah Berurah and in the Achronim, is that the person that's making it, what his intention is for the use of this product. But the Ramah says, what it means is that it doesn't matter what you personally think. It all depends on what normal people use this product for. So let's see what it says over here. What if you made a mat beferish for sikach, even though normal people don't? Mahani, it does help. Okay, so this is telling us if there's no specific custom, if you ask anybody, what do people do with these mats? And they say, I don't know, different things. Then you could determine and you could designate that this mat is for schach and it won't be makabel tuma. But like what the Ramah is trying to exclude is that if everybody sleeps on these mats, then then it doesn't help if you say, I'm making this for schach. Because everybody used to sleep on. You could only designate something for schach if it's neutral, if people use mats for generic for any reason. But if all people or the vast majority of people use these types of mats l'shchiva, you can't just say my sleeping bag I'm using for schach. It doesn't work that way. Or if you bought it for schach. So this is a very important line. This is a huge line in the Mishnah Berurah. What he's saying is the manufacturer who made it l'shem schach, or even the purchaser who bought it l'shem schach, will have no impact if this is a sleeping bag. So the Mishnah Berurah is saying, why is it a problem? Even if technically you might be right, that it does designate it as schach, but the problem is people watching don't see that. If they see you using a sleeping bag for your schach, everybody will say, okay, I could also use a sleeping bag for my schach. But sometimes this designation does work to be meko. If you made it stam, or we don't know what's the reason why it was manufactured, what was the intent of its manufacture. But everybody uses it for schach, then talinon shigamu asal sikach. So at the end of the day, the way a product is used by the masses, that determines and overrules any individual intention that you have with this schach. So I don't know how that would relate to our mats nowadays. Do they make mats? Like the Chinese make mats. They don't make it only for sukkahs. What else do they use them for? Nowadays, they probably use them only for sukkahs because they make the most money out of it.
Mats used for garden decoration.
So then, if that's what the vast majority of these mats are made for, unless the mat lechatchila is made specifically for schach, you shouldn't be able to use it. And I guess that's why you can't just go to Walmart and buy a mat. I mean, you probably buy Armenian there too. I'm sure eventually they're going to get to that. Eventually, they're going to discover that profit center as well. Okay, so let's see what it says.
So size really doesn't matter. Depends. There are other criteria.
You're right. You're right. But normally, if it's that size, it's used l'shchiva. That's what he's saying. So let's see the second half of the mechaber, because here he relates to size. But if it's a large mat, like a tarp, then stamai medis l'sikach. That is used primarily for schach and therefore it's not makabel tuma, and you would be able to use it for schach. Unless elim kain asal l'shchiva, unless you designate it for shchiva, the hainu sheminik hamakam lishkav aleh. That's only if it's the derech for people to sleep on massive 48-inch beds, and that never happens. Okay, so that now we're going to a new point. So let's see what it says in Yud Ches in the Mishnah Berurah. Elim kain asal l'shchiva. The hainu ein roitz aloymer. The mechaber is not trying to say lafukeim haya minik l'sikach. It's not saying that if everybody uses these large things for schach, oz gam machshav b'didei shechasav l'shchiva loy mahanimini imut l'sakach. Don't think that if everybody uses these large mats for schach, and you specifically had intended to use them to sleep on, you wanted to use them as a floor in your tent when you went camping. That's not true. Then you would not be able to use it. The kivin shechashav l'shchiva, once you had in mind to use it for shchiva, harayard la taris tuma basal sakech. I guess because we know that everything is yored l'tuma b'machshava. So therefore, if you even intended to use it to sleep on, then it becomes a mekabel tuma, and you won't be able to use it anymore for schach, even though that's what it was normally used for. What the Mechaber is trying to tell us is the lavdavke masal l'shchiva. Not only if you made it l'shchiva, if that's what people use, if this is normally used to sleep on, it's as if it was designated for that. And if you don't know what people normally use these for, if it's a big mat and it's not defined what people use it for, then for sure you can use it for schach. As long as we know that no one designated it for shchiva. You should know. So I guess in the time of the Chavetz Chaim there in Europe, kol machzelas asuyas l'shchiva. All mats, big and small, are used primarily to lie on. And therefore the Chavetz Chaim is paskening for his generation in his area. The mats in my days, the Chavetz Chaim, you cannot use mats. So don't invite the Chavetz Chaim for Kiddush on Sukkos if you're using a mat, at least not in those days. So hopefully 9 and 10 will teach us a lot of interesting information in the Dirshu. So let's look at 9. Harei ki'ilu asa ba'atzmei l'shchiva. If the factory or the country where these mats are made, in the eastern countries, I guess in the Far East, right? In China, where these things are made, they're made primarily for sleeping on. But in America, where we use these things for schach, when I say America, I mean Toronto and Canada, which is just an appendage of America. Ein mishtamshim ba, or just like a line on a spreadsheet, maybe barely in America. Ein mishtamshim ba ela l'sika, but in the Western countries where we live, these will not be used to sleep on. You'd never, ever find a product like this at Sleep Country, Canada. So therefore, we only use them for schach. Das hagoyin of nosen karelitz. You wouldn't be able to use those mats for schach. The Hoysef in the adage, even if the vast majority of these mats are not used to sleep on, therefore, you need to know for a fact that it wasn't made to shchiva. Because if you just buy a generic mat, you can assume it was made wherever it was made with shchiva, and some smart aleck figured, hey, these are the same type of mats that we use for sukkah. Let me buy them cheap and sell them in America, and that would be a real problem, according to Rav Nissen Karelitz. 10. Umachzelos asuya min nisra eitz dikt dakim arugim zelazeh aidechutim. So I assume this is our mats, a whole bunch of thin slats of wood that are connected together with fibers. I think that's how our mats are made, are they not? Even if they're made specifically and they're manufactured specifically for schach, you still have to be concerned not to use it for schach. Oven, even though each individual slat is not wide enough, but could be this would fall under the category of the Gzeres Tikra, because the mat as a whole is a large area. They're not just happening to be lying down near each other, each of individual pieces. They're tied together. So that makes it look like a Neser Rachav Arbat Tvachim. Wow, so this is a big Chiddush and a big Chumrah. If you have a whole bunch of small slats that are lying side by side and they're fastened down with nails, we consider that like one single board that's 4 tvachim. Hapasul l'sikuch, that would be possible for schach k'mavur b'shulchan aruch lalon, that we learned. Umasha nechnasen geshamim derech hamachzelas, and don't argue that this is not a tikra because rain can easily penetrate it. Kos of sham shezel loy goyim she'eni nachsheves neser. The fact that water can penetrate it does not take away its status of a neser. Eli keneser sheyesh b'nekavim. It's like a board that's possible to use for schach, even if it has holes in it. She'pasul l'sikuch. Ulamaisa hayra. So he passed on Allah lamaisa. She'oifin shemuter l'sachech b'machzela zu. How could you possibly use this mat for schach? You have to cut it into smaller pieces. And each piece has to be less than 4 tvachim, which takes the whole joy out of using a mat. You should make sure that each piece should be less than 3 tvachim, so there we can accommodate the shita of our mayor, even according to the way Shmuel learned. If the strings that hold the individual slats together are made from something that's possible from schach, like yarn, that would be considered like someone who's maimed schach b'davar makabel tuma. So you shouldn't use that lechatchila for your sukkah k'mavur b'mishabur alon. Meidich, on the other hand, the Shas Tshuva Shevet Alevi, who's Rav Vosner, that's all. Because of she'ein lahachmer the machzelas from the certain doctrine. Rav Vosner says, don't be so machmer on mats. Give us a break. Why? Kivon she'ein haderech lasos mahem tikra. Since it's not the custom ever to use these types of mats for tikra. So even though they're 4 tvachim wide, but it's not mistaber to say that the Gzeres tikra applies to a mat. Because they fold up. I would not think. So Rav Vosner argued Abu Yashiv and says, I'm not concerned that there's a problem of Neser mats are allowed. Because of a going of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, you're of course allowed to use mats. Each individual slat in a mat is soft, and you would not confuse them with a roof. No one's going to say, oh, I'm sitting under a mat, I might as well sit inside. And I'm not even worried if the chutim are makabel tuma. I'm not even worried about that. Even if it wasn't for those strings holding them together, there's enough weight on them that they wouldn't blow away. Elos zok Rav Vosner, sheyesh lahakbid sheyu b'machzelas ma'at ma'oid chutim. I'm not sure what that means. You should be makbid that the mat should have very few of these chutim, so he says you should keep them to a minimum. I don't want to very few. You should make sure there's very few, so they shouldn't be tied together very much. And I know the mats that I buy are like that because that's how they fall apart every couple of years. But you shouldn't have too many threads holding together. It shouldn't be so structured, because then the less structured it is, the less tied together it is, the more kosher it would be, because then it's less and less similar to a maimed. When you add it, oh, you're showing me the mat factory.
The Chinese mat factory, you can buy it on Alibaba, and it says for sukkahs.
For sukkahs, look at that. So so the Chinese wanted. I think you just showed me on Alibaba a video of them manufacturing the mats, and the Chinese factory said, buy this for the religious holiday sukkahs. So they must have learned the Gemara that you have to make it l'shem sukkah. If it's very windy.
Before they knew about sukkahs, they were also manufacturing it. They used
but then now they changed.
I don't know. For 7 days of the year to have a year of manufacturing.
They're not basing it on time. They're basing it on revenue.
No.
Anyway. So in a windy place, if you use a mat to blow away, you should put a board, a beam, something heavy on top of the mat. Don't rely on the strings to tie it down. Better use something a weight on. The Shevet Levi, but he says I don't have the guts to allow mats Because in Friedrich Kadaris, people didn't use mats. So this is a new thing. I'm not comfortable approving a new way of doing schach. And it's very dangerous because you can look at two mats that are identical, yet one was made l'shem schach and it'll be kosher, and one wouldn't. That's a little bit too dangerous for me, for my comfort level, and I wouldn't want to allow it. However, like abischach hanikra kindness, she'ena awesome nisraich. Oh, so the mats that we were talking about until now are mats that are made of small slats of wood. Those are not the mats that we use. Our mats are made out of slats of like straw or bamboo. Hanikra kindness, okay. I don't know my Yiddish or my Hebrew terms for this, but kindness, I assume, are like our soft slats. She'ena awesome in Nisra eights. They're not actually boards of wood, thin strips of wood. They're made from reeds. Or if you have mats that are made out of leaves, there Rabbi Yashav said, phew, I'm happy we learned these last few lines because I was getting very uncomfortable. With beer, and Rabbi Yosef explained the difference. Even if you would make out of slats of wood the ceiling, you for sure are never going to make it out of soft reeds. So this is the most important line. Mats that are made out of reeds are for sure allowed.
But these are also used for window shades and curtains and things like that.
Yeah, of course, they had to be made dafka l'shem schach. So he's talking about the Xeris Tikra. What he's discussing is there a Xeris Tikra? This is a whole new idea. Is there a Xeris Tikra on mats since they're all one big piece? So he said if they're made out of reeds, for sure there's no Xeris Tikra. But you still have to make sure that it was made l'shem schach and not l'shem shchiva. That's still an issue. So even though he mentions there that he mentions at the bottom he's uncomfortable, it's a new thing, and how do you know what it was made for? He's willing to let us get away with that if we know that it wasn't made l'shchiva, provided that at least it's made out of something very soft.
Victor, can you post that Alibaba piece on the chat?
Sure. Yeah, if he forwards it and you order through his link, then he makes money off it. Okay, let's see the heading of Gemara Vayter. So yesterday we learned a machlokes in our Mishnah about whether or not you're yoytze the mitzvah sukkah if you sleep under a sukkah. It's very, very interesting. So we had Rabbi Yehuda who said that we slept under the bed, on the dover, meaning you're allowed to sleep under the bed. And Rabbi Gamliel said, I'll prove to you that Rabbi Shimon said, I'll prove to you from Rabbi Gamliel's story that you're not supposed to sleep under a bed because he showed how Tevi Avdai knew that he was potter from sukkah and he slept under a bed. So there's a couple of shilas over here that come up on our Mishnah. Number one is, why didn't the Mishnah say, Ein Yeshenim Tachas Hamita B'Sukkah? You're not allowed to sleep under a bed in the sukkah. It says, Lo Yotza Yidei Chayvasa. The question is there a chiyuv to sleep? If I didn't want to eat a sudas kva a whole week, I don't have to sit in the sukkah. So what do you mean lo yotzi dechevasa? There is no chiyuv. Is there a chiyuv that you have to go sleep in the sukkah? There are those who bring a raya from this Mishnah that there's a chiyuv bedavka yes to sleep in this, just like we have a mitzvah the first night to go eat a kazayis in the sukkah, and there's a chiyuv to go there in the sukkah. So by Shina as well, there's a chiyuv to eat in the sukkah. There's a chiyuv to sleep in the sukkah, because otherwise it should just say Aser lishain tachas amita b'sukkah. So that's one interesting deal that some people make. And the other interesting thing is here is Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel was proud of his eved who didn't sleep, who knew that he didn't have to sleep in the sukkah. But he was proud that his Eved was a Talmid Chacham. Isn't there a rule that if you teach a goy Torah in this Mischai ben Afshay, so how could Rabbi Gamliel teach him Torah? So there's a couple of.
Who says he's a goy? First of all,
well, he's not a Jew.
Could be an Eved Ivri. And second of all,
he was an Eved Knani. No, he was an Eved Knani. That's why he's part of from Sukkah.
All right, that's true. Anyway, so but even in Yevet Kanani zone, he's mechuyev in a lot of mitzvahs, but
He's a mechuyev that women are mechuyev.
that's right. But he could be a. I mean, you're allowed to teach an Eved. He has some halachas that are relevant.
So those who learn that you're allowed to teach, but women are mechuyev to learn the halachas that are relevant to them. They don't have to learn the ksais hachoshen, but they have to learn. They have to learn the halachas. So it could be an Eved is mechuyev to learn those halachas. There's actually a shaila if an Eved makes brachas. A woman who does a mitzvah that she's not mechuyev in, she'll make a bracha. She's not mechuyev on the tilas lulav, yet she'll make a bracha on the tilas lulav. Does an Eved make a bracha on the tilas lulav if he does it anyway? There's actually a shaila, and one of the achronim, I forgot who, says there's a difference because a woman that she's not mechuyev in mitzvahs, in all mitzvahs, it's not because there's a chesed in her Yiddishkeit. To the contrary, we old women are higher on a spiritual level, and they don't need all of the mitzvahs to be mekadosh themselves. But the reason why an Eved is not mechuyev in all the mitzvahs is because he's not a complete Jew. His not being mechuyev in all mitzvahs is a symptom of not really being a full Jew yet. So it could be there are shittas who hold that an Eved would not be allowed to make a bracha on a mitzvah that they weren't mechuyev. Okay, so we are up to Tanan. We're talking about Halachos. So we discussed over here that a mita asara is a high enough bed that it's considered an oil underneath it, and that's why you're not allowed to sleep underneath the bed. So we are very late. So let me get cracking. Sometimes the waves on the shore, if it's a stone face to the shore, the waves will erode and create an indentation like a cave. I think by Rosh Hanikra, that's it's the holes were dug, the caves were dug by water. So there's an oil there, but it's not man-made. Or sometimes you'll have a pile that the shrotzim eat into and therefore creates a little bit of a cave. Or if it's a sinkhole. If there's a sinkhole and an area opens up and there's a cave there. Or if you pile up stones in a pile, let's say when you take delivery of a skid of interlocking bricks or stones, often the way the stones are piled up one another, if they're not all the same size, there would be gaps in between stones that would be covered by other stones that create an oil. Or boards that are delivered, if they're piled one on top of the other, sometimes there'll be a gap in between the boards, which would be covered. So those are all oil. Mile alatuma. Mile alatuma means if there's a kazayis from a mace in that groove, in that gap, anything else in that gap will be tummy. Kol oil if it's not man-made intentionally, then it's not considered an oil and it will not spread the tumah. That's a big chiddush. A man-made oil is spreads tumah. Not a man-made oil does not spread the tumah. My time is Rabbi Yehuda. What is the svara of Rabbi Yehuda? Where does he get it from? So oil min mishkan. He learns oil by tumah from the oil of the mishkan. Which is by the parsha of tumah and parsha Sukka. Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who covered the mishkan with the urios mal alam b'di adam, just like when Moshe did it was b'di adam. Afkam b'di adam, so too it's b'di adam. So a lot of people ask that Moshe Rabbeinu ended up needing help from the Rebbeinu Shalom to build a mishkan. So it wasn't really man-made. So there's a lot of Torah about that. There are those who learn that the oil he did put on by himself, and there are those who say that Lamai said Pasuk calls it that he did for the Adam. So the limud works for us. Rabbanon, oil riba, and the Rabbanon holds every type of oil, even not man-made, is tamei because it says oil many times in the parsha. In Parshas Parah, which is in Parshas Chukas, it says oil many times to tell you that any type of oil will be matam. So we have a machlokes if a man-made oil, if a naturally occurring oil, or it's not man-made, if that's malal tumah. It's a major machlokes. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold that if it's not man-made, it won't spread tumah or a mini? And this is a fascinating Gemara, and it goes all the way on Talmud Beis, just to prove that even if it's not man-made, it's still going to be an oil. The we know that by the Parah Aduma, they were very, very makbid on its kedusha. And the reason why they were so makbid on its kedusha is because they did something specifically to show that we're not so makbid. Because the Tzedokim held that a Tvul Yoim, somebody who became Tameh, went to the mikveh today, but didn't yet wait till the night to arrive, he may not be involved in the Parah Aduma. And we know Halacha L'maisa they are. So to show the Tzedokim that they're wrong, whenever they prepared a Parah Aduma, they were B'davkim et Tameh the person first, had to go to the mikveh, and then he did it. So since they were showing such a callous towards Tumah, in every other way, they went crazy to make sure it's so chomerdik, so people shouldn't take Parah Aduma lightly. So what they would do is, they built neighborhoods on top of bedrock, and they made sure that they were a series of domes or arches that held up the entire platform that the neighborhood was built on. So there's actually dead space underneath the platform before they hit the bedrock. You know why they did that? They cover at time. Because who knows if in prehistoric times a mace was buried somewhere underneath that bedrock, and we don't want the tumah to affect anybody on this platform. So by creating an oil underneath the platform, the tumah would be contained below the platform. Mavim nashim ubaris, the old sham. They would bring pregnant women there and they would give birth there. So some people ask, why pregnant women? Why didn't you say bring the women before they're pregnant? So there's a whole shaila about pregnant women if there's a problem with tumah. There's a shaila if a woman who's who married a kohen and she's pregnant, is she allowed to go in to a basic forest? In other words, if it's a male child, that male child is not allowed to become tummy. There's a sefer called Kava Kushoisa. Kava Kushoisa literally means a kav, a measurement of hard dates, I think, or hard figs. But Kava Kushoisa was written by the Chelkas Yaakov, I think, and it's Kava, which is gematria 103, Kushoisa. He has 103 kashas that he felt there were no answer to. And one of the 103 questions that he asked is this: why are we waiting until they're pregnant? Maybe they have to avoid tumah even before they're pregnant. So there are different shittas about it. But some hold that it would be called tumah balua when the baby's in the mother's stomach. There's not an issue. Some people learn that you go basarayv, meaning 50% of the children are female. And out of the other remaining children, some of them are nefel. So there's only a miyat of people that would be in her that she would be carrying that would have this problem. But there's a whole trial about that. Anyway, they would raise their children on these pure platforms, lepara, to be able to use. So these kohanim, they were kohanim, so that these children would be able to process the parah aduma. And when it came to processing the parah aduma and drawing water to mix the ashes with, they would bring oxen. They put a platform on top of these oxen for the children to sit on, because these dalsois, these platforms, these doors would act as an oyel, which would not let the tumah pierce through the dalsois, so that protects the children sitting on top of them. The tinagis would sit on top of these flat platforms that were on top of these oxen. The kaisha shall even be a dayim, and they had stone kalim, which are not makabel tumah. They had to go down to the shiloyach, which are the Silwan springs, and that's where they got the water from. There they got off the oxen and yardul soichamayim. And Rashi says that and Tosfos asks, so they're at risk over there of becoming tamei. So Rashi tells us, since they held that you couldn't just lower down the keli with the string, you have to actually draw it. That's what the hell halacha had to be done. So they had to take that risk. And Tosfos says, even though the kohen was mixing it also holds the water directly, but we're trying to be as strict as possible. Whatever we could avoid, we avoid. Umilim, they would fill up the kalim with water. But all of Yoshulam, they went back on top of the oxen and went back to their safe zone. Yosy says, no, you don't have to go down yourself. You can just lower down the bucket with the string, which means that he didn't have to be exposed to tumah. The child didn't have to be exposed to tumah because they can stay on the board. If they cover at time. Tosfos even brings a shita that I'm sorry. Before we go, there was a third shita. Well, they would just tie buckets on strings on the horns of the oxen, And when the oxen would get to the shaluach, they would lower their heads to drink. And then automatically, the kalim would be submerged. They would get filled up with water. And then when the oxen finished drinking, they would lift their heads up. The pails would be pulled out of the water, and then they would walk back.
Why did they have to go get the water themselves? Anybody else would have been dominant?
That's right. They wanted the water only to have been gotten in the purest way.
They used the stone. They used stone kalim for the other piece because the stone kalim aren't makabel tumah. Why didn't they just scoop up the water and stone?
Because they were trying to go extra crazy on the tumah. They didn't have these platforms on top of the oxen. The oxen themselves acted as the oil. So, Frank the Gemara about shvarim, the oil chain also with the adamu. Oxen are an oil, but they're not made. They're not man-made. The Ketanya Rabbi Aimer lahem mevin dalsos al shvarim, and Rabbi Yehuda says they didn't use doors; they used oxen. So you see clearly Rabbi Yehuda holds that even an oil that was not man-made is considered a good oil. Yet we said earlier that Rabbi Yehuda said that only if it's man-made. So the Gemara Yuchchidish, he said, Egrov is Rashi says is the head, is the fist of a big guy. Oil, Rashi says, Rashi Kamal Egrov, oil, Shirachav Kamal Egrov, Shuyoshem Tefach. That's an area that's bigger than the Tefach. There, Moed Rabbi Yehuda, Shafapi, She'enei also B'di Adam, Chashav L'Yosay. And Rashi brings some other places where if it's a Tefach, if it's very big, there Rabbi Yehuda is Moed, even if it's not man-made. Tanya Mehachi, Moed Rabbi Yehuda b'Shekifin, uvenet Kika Esloim. Rabbi Yehuda is Moed. When like a piece of rock disconnects from a mountain face and it gets pulled off and there's an indent inside, or if a boulder has a little piece of rock that cracks out of it for whatever reason, and there's a little hole inside, if it's a tefach there for sure it would be, I guess those are bigger holes, and those whose moida would be metama. Let's look at a delis. The yeshba kama egroifim. Delis has many egroifim. It's very high from the ground. It's way more than a tefach from the ground. It's probably 5 or 6 feet from the ground. The Ketanya Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Loi Hayu Mevin Dalsos al Shvarim. Rabbi Yehuda didn't allow dalsos. Why didn't he allow dalsos? Amar Abaye, it's not like Rabbi Yehuda didn't allow dalsos. It's like Hutzachul Avi dalsos. He just says there's no need for the dalsos because you could rely on the oil that's created by the ox. Rav Amar Loi Hayu Mevin Dalsos Kalikir. They didn't want to use platforms. Rabbi Yehuda outlawed don't use platforms. You know why? Because a flat platform, someone would be comfortable moving around on. An ox sitting just on the ox itself, you're afraid you're going to fall off. You're going to hang on for dear life. You're not going to lean over. If they should die, if they're just on a flat platform, the child will be confident. And then then he might lean over the edge. And then if there's tummy coming up from the time, he'll become tummy. He'll become tummy. You want to make sure that he keeps his arms inside. Now we're in amusement park season. They always say keep your arms and legs inside the cart at all times. So that's exactly what they wanted done over there. So therefore, they made sure that the child felt like he was in a precarious position and he would hold on tight and he wouldn't stick his arms and legs out. They didn't allow platforms or doors to be put on top of the oxen for the children to sit on. If they should die, Ella, what did they do? They brought Egyptian oxen which had very wide bellies. They had wide bellies. And the children sat on top of the oxen. The kosher shall even be a day. When they got to the Silwan Springs, they got off the oxen, and they filled up these kalim, and then they went and climbed back up on the oxen. Now that we went through this entire parsha, Barimita, getting back to the bed in the sukkah, that we said that the boys slept under them and there was no issue, meaning the mita wouldn't create an oil that would prevent them from sleeping underneath. The yeshba a bed is tall, is high from the ground, meaning it would be an oil. So how could they sleep under those beds if they have an egg ripe, even if they were not built as an oil? They're considered an oil. If they're considered an oil for tumah, why aren't they considered an oil for sukkah? So tomorrow, shiny mita, when a bed is made, the bed's not made to put something underneath it. A bed's made to lie on top of it. So that automatically makes it lose its status of an oil underneath because it was never even made for underneath it. In fact, Gemara, that doesn't help. The oxen also are made to sit on top of them. they're not made to be used underneath them, so it shouldn't be an oil. The shepherds, if they were very hot and it was a sunny day, they would actually lie down underneath the oxen so that they would get the shade and pray that the ox doesn't want to sit down or doesn't want to relieve himself, right? Or in the rain, they acted as a perfect awning. I bet as well, people put their shoes and their sandals underneath it. And Rashi says the reason why Jaffa says shoes and sandals is because the Gemara of Abasa says that you're not supposed to store stuff under the bed because of a ruach ra. An Erlich person only stores shoes in the shoe season and sandals in the sandal season because he takes them off and he gets in the bed, but nothing else. And Rashi says another reason why people shouldn't put things under their bed is because if you store stuff under your bed, especially if it's a matrimonial bed, then sometimes people are going to come into your room who don't belong there to get things that you store there. And that's a lack of tznius. Ela Amarava. I don't know, my kids always barge into my room like it's their house. And I always tell my kids I wouldn't dare have ever went into my parents' bedroom. But nowadays, Ela Amarava. Chinese shvarim. Oxen are different. The reason why they're called an oil is because their oil is protecting all of their innards. Shenemar, and this is speaking about a human, but it applies equally to a behema. Oru basar al bisheni, you will clothe me with or and basar, with bones and sinews. You will shelter me. Miloshin schach, miloshin oil. So that's how you know that you see a remes from Novi that the backbone of a person, the backbone of an animal, acts as a tent, as an oil over his insides. Even though, in fact, that the beds might be considered an oil, but Rabbi Yehuda holds that a sukkah requires a diras kva, and a bed is definitely not a diras kva. The sukkah oil kva. The oil aray of the bed will not be mevatel the oil kva. So when you're lying there under the bed, we don't say you're lying under the oil of your bed. We say you're lying under the oil of your sukkah. If you remember earlier in the Masechta, we had Nafsayin Rashi says we had a whole list of Tanaim that all subscribe to the same philosophy that sukkah's diras kva. Even though they don't all agree with each other's halacha, but they each have a halacha that shows you need some type of kvias to the sukkah. And so Reb Shimon was also on that list. And we know Reb Shimon says you cannot sleep under the bed. Reb Shimon, the Reb Shimon in our Mishnah said you can't sleep under a bed. So you're right. That is the machlokes. Reb Shimon holds that the bed, which is an oil arai, will be mevatel oil kfa, and therefore you can't sleep under the bed. And Reb Yehuda holds that the oil arai will not come and be mevatel oil kfa. Reb Shimon, Tanya, Reb Shimon, Misichasoi shel Rabbi Gamliel, from the idle talk, casual talk of Rabbi Gamliel, talking about his Eved, Lamadnu, we learn Shnei Devarim, two important halachos. Lamadnu, we learn Shavodim Keturim min HaSukkah. We learn that an Eved is potter from sitting in the Sukkah. Lamadnu, we also learn Shayoshin Tachas Hamita Lo Yotzi Yidei Chivos. If you sleep underneath a bed on Tukkas, you will not be Yotzi. Frank Gemara, why did he use the word Misichasan from the idle chatter of Rabbi Gamliel? We learned this. Why didn't he say Midvarim of Rabbi Gamliel, which is really the normal way that you say things? From Rabbi Gamliel's words, we extracted two important chedushim. Dr. Gemara, the reason why I use Sichasan, which is referring just to idle chatter, is to teach us an important lesson. Milsa Agavorcha Kamash Malon. It teaches us another lesson. Kiha, the Amar of Achabar Ada, Amrila Amar of Achabar Ada, Amarav, Amnuna, Amarav. How do you know that you have to analyze and appreciate even their idle chatter, even their casual conversations? Shenemar, it says, referring to the Torah. They'll be like strong trees, but even their leaves will not. What the word will they get? Will not wither, right? Even their leaves will wither. In other words, even the light things that the Chacham are saying, like leaves, even those are going to be very, very important. So there's a lot of Torah on what this means. There are those who learn is that you have to watch Talmidei Chacham they speak, and copy their mannerisms because they're supposed to be speaking in a very respectful manner. You have to analyze that. There's another interesting twist on it. That's a Talmidei Chacham Shvichen Limud, meaning if you hang around amongst Talmidei Chachamim, it's going to force you to learn more because they're always going to be talking and learning amongst each other, and you're going to feel like an outsider. So it's going to force you. Talmidei Chachamim Shvichen Limud, Sichas Talmidei Chacham Shvichen Limud, the merely hanging around, listening to Sichas Talmidei Chacham will prompt you to learn more so that you could be part of the conversation when there's a conversation going on. Let's see the Mishnah Vayter. What if you put your sukkah on top of a bed? In other words, you have a bed and it was like sort of a canopy type of bed. And instead of having a canopy there, you put schach on top of it. Share that will be a kosher sukkah. If the schach cannot stand independent of the bed, then it's going to be possible. So, my time to Yehuda, what's the problem with putting schach on the bed? There's actually a machlokes between Reb Zeir and Reb Abba bar Mamel as to why it would be possible. One man Damar says because a bed is something that moves around. It's not something that's in a steady place. And he holds, Rashi says, Reb Yehuda holds, Sukka dirs kva be'inan, and since beds move around, I guess their beds were much more mobile, therefore it wouldn't be good for a sukkah. The reason why Reb Yehuda disallows it is shemamida b'davar hamakabel tuma. A bed is a keli, and therefore, if you're resting the schach on the bed, you're resting the schach on something that's makabel tuma. My beinayu, is there a difference halacha between how we would understand Rabbi Yehuda's prohibition of using a bed? Zok the Gemara, I'll tell you an example of an afkamina. What if I created a mamide schach that was made out of metal, but it was very, very permanent? If you hold that Rabbi Yehuda's only problem is that it's not kavua, here it's very solid, it's not going anywhere. But if you hold the problem is if you use metal as a frame to hold up your schach, it's being minded b'davar makabel tuma. Amar Abaye, lo yishanu ela samach. The only time Rabbi Yehuda does not allow you to put the schach on the sukkah is if you actually put the schach on the bed itself, and the bed is the maimed, the bed is the frame that's holding up the schach. But what if you took 4 poles and you put it around the bed, and you built a frame above the bed, and you put the schach on top of that frame? So you're not putting the schach directly on the bed, you're just putting it on your wooden frame. Then it would be kosher. My time. What's the reason? Because we can check off both problems. The problem is the Mandamar held that the reason why Rabbi Yehuda didn't allow it is because it's not permanent. That frame that you built is permanent. It's not the bed. The Mandamar and the Mandamar holds that Rabbi Yehuda's problem is that you cannot support the schach on something that's makabel tuma like your bed. In this case, you have a separate frame that it's on. Here, you're not supporting the schach with something that's makabel tuma. So really, this takes us into a whole new sugya of being maimed b'davar makabel tuma. We hold ba'etzim that it would be kosher if you're maimed on a davar makabel tuma. However, we're makbid normally not to. So what we do is, even if there's metal involved, we usually put a piece of wood on top of the metal and then put the schach on top of the wood. And that's what most poskim hold is good. However, the Chazon Ish was makbid that you could not do that. And the reason why I held you couldn't do that is because if you put a piece of wood on top of the metal and that supports your schach, well, now your wood is part of your schach. So weiter you're on metal. So he held that the whole sukkah, the whole frame, whatever is holding up the schach, cannot have anything in it that's makabel tuma.
How could you put it on a balcony? Like in Yerushalayim,
right?
Right.
What's the problem? Balcony is a concrete balcony. It's mechubel karka.
No, but there's rebar in there. The whole thing's made of. There's.
I think if it's built in, it's not. It's mechubel. Anything that's mechubel karka is not makabel tuma. The problem is if you build a structure, if you build a frame. So I don't know exactly how the Chazon Ish sukkahs look, but I would just make sure that since there's no metal involved, I would make sure that it's sturdy.
Mechubel karka wasn't enough for paraduma.
I hear. Now the other question is, I wonder if the Chazon Ish people use mats.
Not one's made in China.
Okay, have a wonderful day.
No, I was going to say Yosy.
Yes.
So I have a you know, the canvas sukkahs, which I have. So the frame is metal, right?
Right.
And they have bamboo poles that you're supposed to rest that go on top of the frame, and then
Right.
it's supposed to go on the bamboo, right? But
Right.
the bamboo themselves, the way they sit on the frame are with plastic clips.
Right.
I'm saying the plastic clips hold the bamboo, and then the plastic clip is attached to the frame, metal frame.
Right.
So there's another extra layer between the wood that's holding the mat and the metal frame. So I'm just wondering if how that would play out according to the.
Well, it definitely doesn't. It definitely doesn't meet the chazanish, but it's definitely not a
I
problem.
mean, obviously, it's not a problem because everyone uses them.
That's right.
But
Most people do not tell chazanish. Most sukkah have metal framing in it that the schach rests on. You know, in my sukkah, it's a metal. It's actually a metal frame that has a metal joist hanger, and then you put the woods on the metal joist hanger. You put the schach on top of it. Come on, everybody uses some type of metal to support the wood, either a joist hanger or something like that. So most people are not makbid on the chazanish sukkah. I don't even know if the Rav is makbid on the chazanish sukkah.
I haven't spoken to him exactly.
So, like the sukkah nagoda is metal. There's joist hangers right on the wall that the beams go on.
my understanding
So
is
the nagoda
not
sukkah does
even.
not meet the chazanish.
Right. My understanding from the Chazanish is not just about the schach, just anything, like even the walls themselves are not allowed to be screwed in or something like that. Is that right?
The walls are not a problem. You know, the walls are only a problem of being makabel tumah if you're resting the schach on the walls. But let's say you have walls that are independent of the frame that holds the schach. As long as the frame that holds the schach is not makabel tumah, then the chazanish wouldn't have a problem.
I'm saying, but if
But
the schach,
most people
if the
just rest it
frame,
on the walls.
I'm just saying, yeah. So if it's resting on the walls, even though the top of the wall itself is not metal, but if there's screws holding the walls,
That's right. That's right. Right. That's why according to chazanish, it's very difficult. I wonder how they do the sukkah without having the problem of relying. Because right, the sukkah is screwed together. So why isn't that called part of the maimed? I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I have to brush up on my chazanish. Okay, have a wonderful day.
Yeah.